It's Monday, August 25th, 2025. John Bolton finds out turnabout is fair play. Democrats are blacklisting words, but not how you'd expect, and why the government's new stake in Intel is more complicated than you might think. Next on the AM Update. Within minutes of FBI Director Kash Patel tweeting on Friday morning, quote, "No one is above the law. FBI agents on mission." Federal agents raided the D.C. area home of John Bolton, President Trump's former national security advisor. A Trump administration official told the New York Post that federal agents stormed Bolton's Bethesda, Maryland house around 7 a.m. Eastern Time. The raid is in connection to a probe reportedly involving classified documents that was launched years ago, but torpedoed by President Joe Biden's administration for quote-unquote political reasons. The Department of Justice during Trump's first term opened a criminal investigation in 2020 regarding whether or not Bolton disclosed classified information in his book, The Room Where It Happened. After first proving unable to stop the publication of the book with a lawsuit, the case was referred to the DOJ by then Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe. Well, you might be thinking, hey, this is not a good precedent you want to be setting here. Yes, of course, Trump was the target of all sorts of lawfare, including having his Mar-a-Lago home raided, his wife's underwear drawer gone through by federal agents. But still, you can't treat the other side. Of course, nobody talks about that John Bolton is a Republican, or at least was anyway. You can't do that to the other side. Nope. This is the only way you get the lawfare to stop, is making sure it's actually the process is the punishment for both sides. And need I remind you, this is John Bolton back during the FBI raid of Mar-a-Lago. Listen to this.
Well, it's very hard to speculate on motive other than that he liked cool things. He saw things so he wanted to take them, and he was pretty much able to take them, and not just on classified information matters, on all kinds of things that crossed his desk. Some days he liked to eat a lot of French fries. Some days he took classified documents. He wanted them. Why did he want them? Because he could get them.
That is former NSA John Bolton in the aftermath of the raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago, and saying, yeah, hey, he's a threat to national security. Of course they raided his residence. Now on Friday morning, it turns out John Bolton finds out turnabout is fair play. Don't call it retribution, though. Here is Vice President J.D. Vance, the first of a few clips from his appearance on Meet the Press yesterday morning.
You know, a lot of people have already looked at this and said, this looks a lot like retribution. Is this retribution?
Well, who has said it looks a lot like retribution, Kristen? A lot of people who tried to throw Donald Trump in prison for completely fake charges that were later thrown out by multiple different courts. I suspect that if the media and the American people let this case actually unfold, if they let the investigation unfold as it's currently doing, they're going to find out that what we're doing is being very deliberate and being very driven by the national interest.
I believe that as well, but I still like to call it retribution, because that's what's needed right now. Also, J.D. Vance on the census and just why everything that went down in 2020 with that census completely screwed over middle America.
Of course, people who are here and who are not documented are not eligible to vote. But
they're not eligible to vote, but they do go in the congressional apportionment. That's why California has so many more seats, is because they count illegal aliens. So even though they don't vote, well, some of them actually do vote, but hopefully most of them don't, they end up getting congressional representation that ought by right go to American citizens.
I know.
On the topic of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, here is J.D. Vance spelling out like he's talking to a fifth grader. He's talking to Kristen Welker at Meet the Press, NBC News, spelling out like he's talking to a fifth grader just how diplomacy works.
The Ukrainians are going to ultimately make the determination about where you draw the territorial lines in their own country. But Kristen, this is how wars ultimately get settled. If you go back to World War II, if you go back to World War I, if you go back to every major conflict in human history, they all end with some kind of negotiation. We're actually not active parties in the negotiation. We're effectively mediating. We're trying to mediate the Ukrainians and the Russians to come to some agreement. If the Ukrainians are willing to say something on territory that brings the conflict to the close, we're not going to stop them. We're also not going to force them, because it's not our country. We're trying to play a constructive role. The president is trying to play a constructive role to bring peace to the region, but he's not going to force these parties to walk through the door. All he can do is open the door and ask them to negotiate in good faith.
Back at home on the crackdown on crime in the nation's capital, Vice President Vance says there is something very fundamental to what the president is trying to accomplish.
We don't have to live like this. My message to my fellow citizens here in D.C. or all across the country would be that allowing vagrants and armed robberies to take over your city, that's a policy choice. What President Trump is showing is that if you just empower local law enforcement to arrest and prosecute the bad guys, we can take back American streets. You, as a young family, whatever the color of your skin, you should not have to cross the street because there's a crazy person yelling at your children on the other side. You should not be worried that if you take your son out for a meal at 8 o'clock in the evening, an armed robber is going to assault your family. This is a policy choice to allow lawlessness to overrun our cities. The president has made a different policy choice. And I think what he's showing the entire American community is that we don't have to live like this. And
that is a powerful and winning, I might add, message back at the White House again. Here's President Trump saying, D.C. is only the beginning.
I really am honored that the National Guard has done such an incredible job working with the police. And we haven't had to bring in the regular military, which we're willing to do. We have to. And after we do this, we'll go to another location and we'll make it safe also. So I think Chicago will be our next, and then we'll help with New York, and we're going to help with...
So there's President Trump saying that D.C. is only the beginning. And of course, I kind of talked about this in passing at the time, that you could always couch this. You could deploy the National Guard to some of these cities and couch it as, well, they're there to protect ICE and immigration and deportation efforts. I think that's probably what they're going to end up doing. In other news, since we last spoke, the Department of Justice released several transcripts and audio recordings of Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche's interview with Ghislaine Maxwell. Senior Trump administration official met with Maxwell and her lawyer, David Oscar Marcus, over 2 days in July at the federal prison in Tallahassee, Florida, where she was previously held while serving her 20-year sentence. Maxwell, who was moved to a minimum security federal prison in Bryan, Texas, earlier this month, was convicted, of course, in 2021 for trafficking minors for sex as Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirator and confidant. Transcripts and audio recordings from their meeting revealed that Maxwell still does not believe Epstein committed suicide in 2019. When asked to speculate about who might have killed him, she stated she did not know. She also stated that she's never seen President Trump in any inappropriate situation with Epstein. Check out this story from Politico. Democrats seem to think they can talk their way out of the political wilderness. Nearly 10 months after the 2024 elections, the party is still embroiled in self-recriminations over where they're talking, what they're talking about, and now the actual words they're using, or more precisely, which words they shouldn't utter. In a new memo shared exclusively with Politico, the center-left think tank Third Way is circulating a list of 45 words and phrases they want Democrats to avoid using, alleging the terms put a wall between us and everyday people of all races, religion, and ethnicities. Here are some of the words among the blacklisted terms. Privilege, stop saying that. Violence, as in environmental violence. Dialoguing, triggering, othering, microaggression, holding space, body shaming, subverting norms, system of oppression, cultural appropriation, Overton window, existential threat to the climate, democracy, economy, etc. Radical transparency, stakeholders, the unhoused, food insecurity, LGBTQIA+, BIPOC, dead naming. So this is the think tank, Third Way. It's a lefty think tank, Third Way, telling Democrats, stop using all of these Marxist terms. I do believe, maybe, we've got some self-awareness going on that side of the aisle, finally. Also, quickly before the break, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced since we last spoke, they're pausing all issuance of worker visas for commercial truck drivers. The increasing numbers of foreign truck drivers operating large tractor-trailer trucks on U.S. roads is endangering American lives and undercutting the livelihoods of American truckers, Rubio says. So that's kind of a duh. But it's a good thing, a good move nonetheless, a righteous move nonetheless. Well, when we come back in Minneapolis, we've been hearing a lot about that mayoral candidate called Omar Fattah. Well, he just lost the Democrats' endorsement. We'll kind of get into that a little bit. Also, highlights from Pastor John MacArthur's memorial service. That's coming up next. In Minneapolis, Omar Fattah is the Somali-American, well, he was born in America, but Somali-American mayoral candidate for Minneapolis. He has lost the DFL endorsement. That's the Democrat Farmer Laborers Party. He has lost the DFL endorsement over voting irregularities at their convention. Here's current Minneapolis mayor and candidate Jacob Fry.
This is not a scenario where you need to take my word for it. As the state party said, and as the investigation showed, this was a process that was rife with errors and misconduct. Hundreds of people didn't get counted out of hundreds of votes in total. There was an entire ward where nobody knew who the ward delegates were. The whole thing went missing. I don't know. We still don't know exactly how they became to the determination based on that ward. The data itself was given to the other campaigns and they were allowed to edit it.
So there's current Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry discussing the revocation of the DFL's endorsements for Omar Fattah for mayor of Minneapolis. As you heard Jacob Fry, Mayor Fry, discuss all of the irregularities in voting at their, convention and how just rife with errors and just cheating there was, it kind of reminded me. Well, it prompted this question, at least. It prompted this question. I wonder what elections look like in Mogadishu, because I think they'd probably look a lot like that. And now here's this, a couple of highlights I want to share with you from the memorial service for Grace Community Church Pastor John MacArthur, which happened over the weekend. First up is actually John Piper. Spoke at this service. I also saw Alistair Begg, as an aside, spoke at this memorial service as well. But when you think about John Piper and John MacArthur, kind of diametrically opposite personalities, and during his memorial for John MacArthur, Pastor Piper took note, in a humorous way, of that very dynamic.
Our friendship was thrown into very strong and stark, beautiful relief by the fact that we were so differently wired by way of personality. Many of you, I can tell by your laughter, remember a most vivid illustration of this during a panel discussion in which the panel leader asked us to comment on how we deal with discouragement. And I told the story of sitting on the steps of a guest house crying, and my wife coming to me and saying, "Johnny, what's wrong?" And I said, "I don't have any idea." And MacArthur looked at me like I was from another planet. And he said, "I don't have time to be discouraged. I just go on to the next thing to be done." Anyway, it was a wonderful learning moment for all the young pastors out there, because I wanted to say to them, take heart, not everybody's like MacArthur. God uses melancholy pastors.
There's John Piper recounting a panel where the difference in their personalities was perfectly illustrated. Also want to share this clip with you. John MacArthur's son, Matt, shared some of his father's very final words before passing into glory.
His last words to me were, "Son, be faithful." He didn't say write a book. He didn't say be the keynote speaker at a conference. He said, "Be faithful." What a model. He then went on to say to me, whispering, barely could talk, "Death, where is your sting? I feel no sting. Grace has overpowered my sinful heart." What a gift, what a gift. Grace is the greatest power because it pushes sin away. It's all of grace. I am unworthy. I've lived to see my children's children, and I pray that you all will finish well.
The son of a man who finished well. That is John MacArthur's son, Matt, sharing some of the final words from his father before he passed into the arms of his Savior. What an inspiring message, hopefully for you, on this Monday morning. And finally, air analysis, slightly acidic, mostly necessary. You don't come to this program for the wonderful transitions, the wonderful sweeping from one conversation to another. So here we go. There's something I don't quite understand. Yet, as I did more research into this topic, it became obvious to me that I actually think I understand a little bit more than most people now about what we're talking about. So late last week, it was announced. Here is President Trump's announcement. It's my great honor to report that the United States of America now fully owns and controls 10% of Intel, a great American company that has an even more incredible future. I negotiated this deal with Lip-Bu Tan, the highly respected chief executive officer of the company. The United States paid nothing for these shares, and the shares are now valued at approximately $11 billion. This is a great deal for America and also a great deal for Intel. Building leading-edge semiconductors and chips, which is what Intel does, is fundamental to the future of our nation. Make America great again. So, the United States is now a 10% shareholder in Intel. Why? Why are we doing this? I had the same question that a lot of people were asking. Heck, even Gavin Newsom hopped on this and started making fun of Trump for being a communist. Gavin Newsom did over the weekend. A lot of people, why are we doing this? This is the melding of big business and big government. This sounds an awful lot like fascism. And for one of the first times in this administration, I'm like, I got nothing. I don't know what we're doing here. Why it's necessary for the United States government to become a shareholder of Intel. Well, after doing a little bit of reading on this issue, we are in a very difficult spot when it comes to the issue of chip making and semiconductors. Yes, NVIDIA is an American company, but they do most of their manufacturing overseas. And when it comes to semiconductors, NVIDIA is a designer and outsources production elsewhere. So Intel designs and builds. It's a foundry. It actually produces the physical products. We just had a big deal earlier this year announced with TMSC or TSMC, which is that Taiwan chip-making company. They're going to build factories in the United States. But when it comes to the designing of new leading-edge chips, that's still done overseas. Very little of that being done in America. The one place it is being done, and not very well at all, that's part of the problem here, is with Intel. From what I have read, Intel has basically said, we're going to stop designing chips because we can't find any big customers for our chips. We're going to stop doing all the research and development for any chips because we can't find any big customers for the chips. It's kind of a big, if you're looking at it from the government's perspective, kind of a big deal when you have to purchase and rely upon designs for companies that exist overseas, not ones right here at home. So it's a pretty big problem when you're one of your only designers and producers of microchips domestically says we're throwing up our hands and waving the white flag. So what do? You become that company's biggest purchaser and biggest customer. And that's basically what this was over the weekend. This is picking a winner. Now, this is high technology. This is not like any other industry. There's just a crap load of money that you have to put into research and development when it comes to making microchips. It's very expensive, very risky. But I think the United States government, the Trump administration, just did the math and said, if we don't actually become and guarantee purchasing from this company, this domestic company, we're going to have to rely on China or other countries to do all of the research and development for leading edge chips, leading edge microchips. So yes, this is absolutely picking winners. It absolutely is. Now, in a perfect world, I would just change regulatory policy. I would just change tax policy to make it impossible for companies not to do business here. Make it impossible for them not to come here. Because we have such an environment that fosters innovation, research, and competition that they just can't afford not to do business here, design here, build here. But that's not the world we live in yet. So the best of a really bad set of decisions is what I think the Trump administration and their calculus was over the weekend in purchasing, or at least not, they didn't purchase, they said. They just took control of 10% of Intel. So that's the way I understand things unfolding here, is that our leading chip maker, Intel, who has lagged behind for many, many years now, I'm starting to understand that's probably why Apple dumped them for making chips for their laptops and other computers, is because they were so far behind the curve in research and development. That's the calculus that went into this decision. So is it the old school, the classic definition of fascism, not what the blue-haired lefties scream out all the time? And increasingly, those with Trump derangement syndrome scream out all the time? Is this the melding of big business and big government? I don't know how you would come to any other conclusion. But it's the world that we live in. We have not lived in a real free market for a long, long time. And so you are left with crappy situations like this. Not absolving this at all, but I think maybe you're a little bit more informed now than those who are mindlessly typing in all caps, "This is fascism." Well, yes, but it's also a really bad situation all the way around. So that's it for a Monday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntire, and this is the AM Update.